Some faces look familiar. Has other people been in here this week? Anybody? Okay, I'll try to say some new things maybe that I haven't said the past 2 days. Thanks for having me. Chief Ian Emmons, I kind of grew up with him, or he grew up with me. I'm a lot older than he is. He grew up, my brother-in-law contacted me a couple weeks ago or a month ago, asked me if I'd be interested in coming to do something like this. I do this through the OAPFF. I'm the 4th District Peer Coordinator. My definition is this: if we have emotional issues or anxiety, depression, anger, any of those types of things, and it's keeping us from functioning, keeping us from doing our jobs, doing our normal daily activities, then we have a behavioral health problem or a mental health issue, and we need to look at it and address it. Mental health has not been talked about until recently, other than the people that have been in this class already this week or somewhere else. How many people have sat at a firehouse and had mental health training? Let me see your hands. No hands? Right, so it's a couple, maybe a couple. It's not something we've talked about. When I got into the fire service and started working at the city of Hamilton, we had a run. I don't even remember what the run was. We come back. One of the newer guys was kind of bothered by the run. I mean, he wasn't crying. He wasn't nothing like that. But he vocalized maybe something along the lines, but that's hard to see. So one of the old captains went to his locker, grabbed a Wendy's application, brought it out and set it on the table in front of this guy and in front of everybody else in the room. They said, if you can't handle what we do, Wendy's is hiring. And we all laughed. Everybody laughed. We thought that was funny. Years later, I'm giving a talk similar to this at a symposium. Didn't realize when I told that story that the captain that did that was actually sitting in the room that I was talking to. And he came up to me after and said, man, I'm sorry. If I would have known now, or then what I know now, I would have never done that. But we didn't know. I'm not blaming him. I'm not blaming that generation. We just didn't know. But I'm glad now we're starting to talk about it. We're at a higher risk for PTSD, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. And here's some reasons why. We know this: high stress calls, high call volume, 5 stations, about 8,000 runs a year. Is that accurate? Is that right? That's a lot of runs. That's very busy. Line of duty deaths, obviously. Sleep deprivation. Is there anybody in here that when you leave the firehouse and go home, your first night at home, you sleep well? Because if you do, well, I need to talk to you after and figure out how in the heck that you do it. When I go home and lay down, especially if I've had a rough day the day before, when that next night I'm hearing tones go off in my head, I'm getting up trying to get my clothes on until I realize, crap, I'm at home. That was just in my head. I don't sleep well unless I have a long stint off. Politics of the job, I don't know if you guys deal with that up here, but in the city of Hamilton, it is crazy. It is ridiculous. Every day you can come in the best mood, and within 10 minutes we'll start talking about the city or the chief or something, and it's crazy. And those are things that we can't control. Those are stresses we can control by just not doing it. Substance abuse is on the rise in our area. Probably alcohol is the biggest one that firefighters, first responders are abusers of. Alcohol is a coping mechanism, right? And it's a good one. That's what I did for 3 months. And I didn't think about a whole lot. I didn't deal with a whole lot. The reason it's such a good coping mechanism is because it works. Right? Would we all agree with that? If you're having a bad day, you have a couple drinks or however many it takes for you to start feeling good, you slowly stop thinking about what you're dealing with. It doesn't help. It doesn't fix things, but it numbs you. Suicide. This one scares me to death. You can read the statistics on the study the IFF did. That was about a 2-year-old study now. Suicide is ridiculous. You know, in the state of Ohio already this year, we've had 3 that I know of, 3 that have been that I've been called out or contacted about in the state of Ohio. 1,400 IFF members, 19 said at some point in their career they've contemplated suicide. At the city of Hamilton, we just sent a survey monkey out to all our active members, and we're trying to get some data for our people. I had a guy call me that I work with. He's a newer guy. He's been on about 2 or 3 years. Called me a month ago and said, hey, can we have lunch? I want to talk to you about some stuff. I'm like, sure. And then this is a guy that I hang out with a fair amount, so I'm thinking, he just wants to have lunch. We go to lunch. This is one of the most put together guys I've ever met in my life. We sit down and he starts telling me about his past. And he said he's attempted suicide twice in the past. And he said, I'm getting to a point now where I feel like my mind is going down that same track. I would have never in a million years guessed that this guy was contemplating suicide. Right after I went to my peer class, I traveled to Covington, Kentucky for a suicide. It was of a retired fire chief. I only talk about it because it's very public now. His wife is advocating for suicide prevention in the fire service, which is an awesome thing. We did 3 days. We did with every shift at Covington. We went to all the departments around that this chief had touched. We spoke to the recruit class. Everybody we talked to said, if you would have given us a piece of paper and a pencil and said, write down who you think is capable of committing suicide, they said we would have never even put his name on the list. That scares me. That is a scary thing. I personally know people that I've worked with, not at the city of Hamilton, but volunteering or working part-time. I worked at the jail for a couple years. No medics, first responders that have committed suicide. There's more suicides every year than line of duty deaths. So what is there, 100, give or take 10, either way, right? 122 reported suicides last year in the fire service. And how those are reported is there's one guy, his name's Jeff Dill, he's from Phoenix. If there's a suspicious death in the fire service, he'll make phone calls, call fire chiefs, call families, trying to get some kind of data. So 122 times last year he was able to get confirmation that a death was a suicide. So I'd say that number would really be a lot higher. Anybody in here know somebody who's in the fire service that's committed suicide? Good. PTSD, the statistic, that's about as broad a range as you can get, 7 to 37. There's a big difference between the two. Probably the range is so broad because firefighters, first responders statistically don't speak to counselors, don't talk about our feelings. These next 3 slides I'm going to put up, these are the most clinical slides you're going to see from me. Chief Emmons told me that you guys have a counselor coming in next month. Her name is Cinnamon. Cinnamon is fantastic. She works, she left her, the place she used to work kind of gave her to us, to our department, to help us through the process. So we really bonded with her. She'll go into greater detail with all this, but I put this up here just to give us an idea of some signs and some symptoms, just things to look for. Before we go through it, I would say everybody in this room that has been in the fire service for any length of time, when we start looking at some of the symptoms, you're going to be like, boom, that's me, I've had that. That does not mean you have PTSD. These things up here are normal reactions to stress. And to have a diagnosis, you have to meet one thing in every one of these criteria. So first there's the stressor, the event, what is causing this. Ours is probably more so the constant stressors, the over and the over and the over. And ours is direct exposure. Second criteria is intrusive symptoms, reoccurrent involuntary intrusive memories, traumatic nightmares, flashbacks, going back to bad things. I was talking to a guy this week about how something so small that he was doing at the firehouse triggered a flashback for him, and he had to walk out of the room because he started tearing up. Avoidance, effortful avoidance. Patrick Walshman, the fire was on Pater Avenue. We have guys that will not drive by Pater Avenue unless they absolutely have to. Station 25, where Patrick worked, where we have all the shrines and all the memorials. There were guys that after Pat died, they said, I need out of here, get me out of this firehouse. And they begged not to ever come back. Part of that's because we're the busiest truck in the city. But Persistent negative trauma-related emotions, so fear, horror, anger, shame, guilt. And number 7 there, I don't know if you can see it. Persistent inability to experience positive emotions. Remember what I told you when I was so freaked out about not being able to feel negative emotions? I couldn't even feel positive. I couldn't feel good. And that would explain why my marriage suffered. Irritable or aggressive behavior, self-destructive, sleep disturbance. If you're just the nature of our jobs, getting up and down, we're going to have sleep disturbance. But if we can't sleep because of runs that we've made or thoughts are racing through our mind, that's not great. And the top one, they're irritable. Does anybody know any irritable firefighters? Does anybody know a firefighter who is not irritable? I don't think so. I'm always irritable. The big thing, the criteria F, the duration. So all these symptoms at some point in our career we're going to have. I've had sleep disturbances. I've had nightmares. I've had flashbacks. I've had mood alterations. If they persist for greater than 1 month, and you have to have something in each one of those boxes, then you can get a PTSD diagnosis. That's when they give you a diagnosis. For us as firefighters, that's probably more like 45 days or 2 months before I would really get concerned and say, hey, I need to go see somebody. Put my watch on and got here this morning. My nice fancy watch is dead. Doesn't work. 3 types of stress: cumulative stress, critical incident stress, and post-traumatic stress. Cumulative stress we all have, right? From birth to where we're sitting at right now, we all have some level of stress. My cumulative stress might be different than the Chief's, right? He's got a little bit more on his plate maybe than I do. Somebody that's not married, doesn't have kids, doesn't have their own, maybe they're still living at home, which we have a couple members that still live at home. Their stress is probably not as great as mine, but we all have it. Critical incident stress is the stress that we have when we go out on these runs, when we go out and do these things, when we see some of the things that we see, when we deal with some of the things that we deal with. Post-traumatic stress is when our cumulative stress and our critical incident stress meet and they overflow our plate. We just can't handle it anymore. That's post-traumatic stress. Little by little, stress chips away at our body's ability to process it, right? So when we go out on a call, and when we first started dealing with the counselor, she explained it, every time the tone goes off, you get hit with all these endorphins. Well, I've been in the fire service for 16 years, and many of you in here are longer than me. Not every call gets me going, right? And I'm sure you're the same way. But there are calls that doesn't matter how long we've been on, when they come in, get us going a little bit more, right? Structure fire, car wreck with entrapment, something going on with some kind of child. A hazardous material run really get me freaked out, not so much excited, but freaked out. So our bodies are hit with this chemical cocktail. We're talking about adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, on top of a lot of other things. These chemicals are good for us because they help us to do our job. They help us to go out and to face and deal with the things that we deal with, right? The problem is that it takes about 24 hours for our bodies to metabolize those chemicals, right? When's the last time somebody in here had a one-run day? Probably doesn't happen very often, right? So we're going out multiple times a day, and we're constantly getting hit with these chemicals, and our bodies just can't process it fast enough. That's the cumulative harm effect. If you get nothing else I say besides the suicide stuff and right here, our response to trauma has nothing to do with our character, with our strength, with our toughness, or with our willpower. And I know some people that I've shared this with this week probably do not believe that. We think if somebody cries or they show emotion or they have trouble with their run, we feel like they're not strong enough for this job. They're just not built. They're just not built for this job. That is not true. Everybody in here knows who Mike Tyson is, right? Go to YouTube and type in Mike Tyson crying. And you will find a video of Mike Tyson when he fought for the heavyweight championship. Iron Mike Tyson, right? He's in the locker room crying like a baby. So much his trainer has to walk him outside and say, Mike, what's going on? And you can hear Mike Tyson. He's like, I'm afraid. What if I lose? What if this guy beats me? And his trainer's like, Mike, you fought 20-some times professionally. It's good, you're fine. He goes out and wins the heavyweight title, right? Iron Mike Tyson. Is there anybody in here that if Mike Tyson was sitting in the room, we call him a baby or we call him soft for crying? Because he was that's just how that emotion hit his body. I wouldn't even say that Mike Tyson is soft on Facebook or on Twitter because he's liable to hunt you down and kill you. That's the kind of guy Mike Tyson is, right? That's how his body responds to that stress. So it has nothing to do with whether we're tough or our willpower. It's just what happens. Here's some signs of stress overload. How we learn: memory problems, inability to concentrate, emotional, moody, irritable. Again, that's probably all of us across the board. The big one for me is short temper. I don't know how many dads or how many moms we have in here, but when I know that I'm overstressed is when my kids do something that deserves a response about here, and I give a response like here, and I just lose it and go off. That's when I know I'm stressed. And it may not even be from the firehouse. It may be from something else that's going on. When I get there, I recognize it, and if I don't recognize it, my wife really recognizes it. Behavioral: eating more, eating less. That's why 2 years, I showed the old picture because I've gained a lot of weight because I'm stress eating. Change in normal behavior. This is huge. This is huge for us as peers, watching one another, looking at one another. So you have a professional counselor coming next month. You could have counselors come in here every day of the week for the next month, and they're not going to know you guys like we know each other, right? We live together for 1/3 of our life. In Hamilton, I work with almost the same guys almost every third day. I know them. I know their quirks. I know their strengths, their weaknesses. I know those, right? So if I see a member that is usually engaged in training, engaged in what's going on, all of a sudden start taking a step back and not being as engaged as they once were, to me that's a red flag. It's a change in normal behavior. It doesn't have to be like mine, going from being a pastor one day to throwing up in the toilet in Colorado Springs. It doesn't have to be that big of a change in behavior. But when we recognize these things, you may not recognize it in yourself, but we can recognize those things in one another. Our own symptoms, be honest with ourselves, and that's hard to do. In the fire service, I've been to many different firehouses, and what I see in every firehouse is that we are really good at taking care of other people. Really good at taking care of other people. That's why we're here. That's what we do. We do it, you guys do it 8,000 times a year. You're good at taking care of other people. What we sometimes suck at is taking care of ourselves and looking at ourselves. And we have to do that. We have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to confront any kind of issues because we can grow. Post-traumatic growth, I'm not going to go in real in depth in this. Stress talks about the things that knock us down. Growth talks about the things that pick us back up. Right? So there's a guy I work with, his name's Captain Joe Stamper. I worked with him as a firefighter. Then he was my lieutenant. Then he was my captain for a while before I got promoted. This guy has the worst luck that I've ever seen in the fire service. 2007, we had a guy go into the river, into the dam. I don't know if you guys heard about it up here. We were doing training exercise. He was in the rear boat, pulled his boat right into the dam. His boat broke. He goes into the dam. He was in there circulating for 27 minutes. By chance, when they went to pull the other boat out, his leg got tangled up, so Chris came out with the boat. They did CPR on him there at the river, took him to Fort Hamilton. They got a pulse back, flew him down to UC. We were all getting our Class A's ready. They were talking to their family about life insurance, about all that stuff. A month later, Chris is up walking around Drake Hospital. Captain Stamper was a very integral part of that scene. A couple years later, we had 4 kids burned to death in a firehouse right around the corner from our headquarters. We had 3 kids, and Stamper was one of the first in crews there. We had 3 kids right across the river from where I work. Captain Stamper was the incident commander that night. And then the Patrick Walterman fire, he had pulled right up in front of the house. He had got out of his battalion car, not in front of the house, wherever the battalions park. I don't know where they park. I'm not a battalion. So he parks where the battalions park, and he walks up to the front of the house, and that's when he sees the fireball. And he has Mayday now. So he's running a fire and a Mayday because we don't have another safety officer or anybody that's willing to stop trying to find Patrick to help him do his job. This guy got a PTSD diagnosis, right? Takes medication. We talk about PTSD, we think that's a career ender. Man, if I'm crazy, I can't come back to work. It's not true. I know several guys on my fire department that are high functioning members that have PTSD diagnosis. And they're very good at their job and very able. And they've done it because of post-traumatic growth. They're able to grow from their experience. Stigma, how do we break the stigma? Starts with each one of us. We have to make a personal decision to create an atmosphere where people feel comfortable talking about their issues. We're 3 years past our line of duty death. We've had a lot of problems. We've had a lot of divorces. We've had guys leave the job. We've just had a lot of issues. There are still guys that I work with at the City of Hamilton that are not believers in this program, in a peer support program or a mental health program. And I've had guys come tell me, I still think those people are just not tough enough to do this job. They just need to move on. And this is what I tell people like that. And if you're like that sitting in this room, it's okay. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. But don't screw it up for everybody else. That's what I tell the guys that I work with. If you're not a believer, cool. Don't use the program. Don't take part. But don't make it uncomfortable for somebody else on your crew to get the help that they need or participate. We have to educate. I'm doing a small piece of that today. Cinnamon will come in next month. And she'll give you about 8 hours worth of information in an hour and a half, or an hour, however long she does. We got to lower the standard, not the standard put on us by society, but our own personal standard, and then tell our story. If somebody has a story that can help somebody else keep from going down that road or help them to get help, share your story. Don't be embarrassed about it. Train peers. There are a lot of peers in the state of Ohio. I was in the initial class. There were 33 of us. I think now we have about 35 OAPFF peers for the state of Ohio. You can get on that website, firefightermentalhealth.org, and you can look up peers from Cincinnati all the way up to Toledo. And you can call them. They have their contact information, and you can get help. The big